Welcome back to another episode of Best Books, a program where we discuss some of the all-time greatest books. Today, we have a very special guest who will be talking about her extraordinary memoir. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the author of The Glass Castle, Jeanette Wald.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Jeanette, I must tell you that I absolutely loved reading your book. It was incredibly inspiring and so unique.
Thank you so much. To be honest, I was quite nervous to publish my story. I was fearful that as soon as my friends and coworkers found out about my strange past, they would never talk to me again. But everyone was very supportive and compassionate, and I felt so relieved to let go of my shame and finally embrace the past.
Let's discuss your extraordinary life. Why don't you start at the beginning?
Okay, my very first memory of life was fire. When I was 3 years old, my dress caught on fire while I was cooking hot dogs on the stove. I was paralyzed with fear and could not move, but my mother was able to put out the flames by throwing a blanket over me. I was then rushed to the hospital by a friendly neighbor. You would think such a terrible memory would cause me to develop a fear of fire. Yet, after this instance, I instead gained a fascination for fire. The children in my family had to learn to become independent, practically from the moment we were born. My parents were what one would call nomads. Our family was constantly on the move. My mom, Rosemary, and my father, Rex, never liked to settle down anywhere for too long. So every once in a while, we would do what my dad called the skedaddle. We would pack everything up and lug our few belongings to the car. My dad claimed that he was being chased by the FBI and was constantly on the run. During these chaotic times, I relied heavily on my friendships with my siblings, my older sister, Lori, my younger brother, Brian, and my younger sister, Maureen.
How did your parents get along?
Well, my dad spent a lot of nights staying out late, coming home drunk and losing jobs. One day after Brian was born, we were short on cash, so my dad pawned my mom's wedding ring, which her mother had paid for, and that made her upset. After that, whenever Mom and Dad got in a fight, Mom brought up the ring, and Dad told her to quit whining. One time, they were so busy screaming at each other that they didn't notice I had fallen out of the car after a sharp turn. I sat on the side of the road for hours, wondering if they were going to come back for me. Finally, they did, and I found out it was my brother Brian who noticed I was missing. My dad told me that he would never leave me behind.
It sounds like most of your childhood was spent on the road traveling.
Oh, definitely. One of the worst parts about it was that we always seemed to travel in cars that were complete junk. I remember one time my dad decided that we should go on a camping trip in the Grand Canyon. All of us kids were so excited, but on the way there, our car completely broke down smack in the middle of the desert. At that point, we were about 80 miles out from Phoenix, so we began a 3-day walk back home. After a couple hours of walking, we were eventually able to hitchhike a ride, but it was still an unpleasant and embarrassing experience.
It seems like you lived in a lot of places, most of which were in the desert.
Yeah, before we moved to Welch, I spent pretty much all my childhood in the desert. I loved it, though. I definitely preferred the dry climate of Arizona to somewhere like Welch, which got tons of snow in the winter. The desert was also fantastic for building up my rock collection. I once found this gorgeous geode. Whenever we moved somewhere new, I had to leave behind practically all of our possessions. But on some occasions, our parents would let us take one thing, and I always chose my rock collection.
It sounds like you had an extremely stressful childhood. Growing up in poverty must have been devastating.
Actually, I've learned to appreciate things more because I grew up with nothing. But my dad did do things to try to make up for it. For example, one year my dad had just lost his job, so we had no money for Christmas. On Christmas Eve, Dad took each of us kids out to the desert one at a time. I was 5 that year. He told me to pick my favorite star, and he would give it to me. That was my Christmas present that year. I looked at the stars and finally pointed to the one I wanted. He told me that I had pointed to Venus. He said I could have it, even though it's not a star.
What a touching story. I have to ask you, though, why did you decide to name your book The Glass Castle?
The Glass Castle was a big part of my childhood. My father was an extremely skilled handyman. He was able to fix anything, and he loved to make up crazy inventions. One of his craziest ideas was the glass castle. He and I made blueprints for a castle made completely out of glass. He always promised me that he would build it one day when we had enough money. To me, the glass castle represented hope and helped me keep faith in my father, even when he let our family down by drinking our money away. I guess you could say that the glass castle might represent broken promises, because my father died before we could ever build it. But to me, it will always represent something beautiful and magical, and it will always remind me of my father's best traits.
Your father sounds wonderful, despite him being an alcoholic. What about your mother? What influence did she have on your life?
I would describe my mother as eccentric. She absolutely loved to paint. No matter where we moved or how much of a rush we were in when we left, she would always prioritize her paintings above anything else. One of the best paintings she ever created was of Joshua Tree. She loved how the tree grew crooked and explained to me that its struggle was what made it beautiful.
As I understand, your sister Lori was also an excellent artist. Did your mother's love for art inspire her to pursue the same hobby?
Yes, I think so. Even though our mother was not the best role model, she had true talent for painting. Lori and my mother shared the same appreciation for the beauty of nature in our surroundings. Lori's love for art was the reason she decided to go to New York, so she could attend art school.
She made the decision to leave home.
Yes, she was fed up with life in Welch. Lori needed to go somewhere where she could finally untap her full artistic potential, and Welch was definitely not that place.
Wow, how did your parents feel about that?
Well, neither of them liked the idea at first. Then Mom saw all of us kids were helping to save up for weeks until she graduated high school. Money was scarce to begin with in our family, so we bought a piggy bank to hold the funds. I put in all my paychecks from working odd jobs and at the jewelry store. Even Brian contributed. Lori was getting so excited and counting down the days. Dad was always trying to convince her to stay, though, and he didn't like the idea of the family being split up. One day, Lori came home and found the piggy bank smashed and all the money stolen from it. We immediately knew it was my dad. We all got in a heated argument with him because he claimed he never touched the bank and that he didn't need our money. We should have known better than to leave the bank within his reach. Any money he came across was spent at the local bar of whatever town we were living in at the time. Luckily, Lori was able to get a nanny job with a family that was moving to New York.
On a happier note, I'd like to ask how you became a writer. You have an amazing story, but what inspired you to turn it into a novel?
In high school, I assisted in writing the school newspaper. I fell in love with it, with writing in general. I devoted so much of my time to editing and perfecting my stories. My dad actually helped me quite a bit. He would research whatever topic I was assigned to. By the time I was a sophomore, I was chief editor. I quickly realized writing is my passion, and I wanted to go to New York to pursue my dream of becoming a writer. Eventually, the rest of my siblings followed me and Lori. Actually, they moved to New York a couple years after all of us kids. I was so surprised because my dad always talked about how he hated the city life.
Did your parents move in with you?
I offered countless times for them to stay with me or help pay for housing, but they insisted on squatting in an abandoned building in New York.
It looks like we're almost out of time. If you want to know the rest of Jeanette's story, you'll have to read the book. Jeanette, your story is simply inspiring, and I'm so glad you took the time to talk with us today. Any last words for our viewers?
I would just say that I hope The Glass Castle teaches readers to always appreciate and accept their families, and never to be ashamed of your parents. A parent's love is unconditional, and you should never take time with your loved ones for granted.
Yeah.
Okay, ready? Get it going.
Okay, go.
Can I slide it?
No, turn it off. Keep it off the whole time. I'm just gonna turn it on.
Can I hold it up?
Oh, I wasn't.
Alright, let's do it. Okay, Alex, come lay down. Okay, it's gonna okay.
Get out.
My feet are Oh, it's still going.
Nutritional shake. Score. Oh.
Okay, you're good.
Supportive and compassionate, and I felt so relieved to let go of my shame.
I wasted all my money on clothing goods. Actually, we never.
Actually, more like
I spent it all on beer, so we can never get this. It's just a bummer.